Welcome to the Versions of Healing, the interview segment of the Healing Version podcast, a space created to uplift real stories from real people on their unique paths to healing. In each episode, we sit down with individuals from all walks of life, from survivors, overcomers, healers, and seekers, to talk about the experiences that shaped them and the steps they've taken towards wholeness. There's no single way to heal, and no story is too small. Whether the wounds come from trauma, grief, addiction, broken relationships, or self doubt, this segment is here to hold space for every voice and every version of healing. These conversations are raw, powerful, and rooted in truth. Because healing doesn't just happen in silence, it happens when we share, listen, and grow together. So come as you are, and let's explore the many versions of healing. Hey y'all, what's up? And welcome back to another episode of Versions of Healing with me, your host, Deborah. This is the interview segment of the Healing Version podcast. And today we have Dr. Chahal, and she's going to be talking to us about her book and what she has going on. And I'm super excited about this interview. Dr. Chahal, can you please just start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
I always find this question very interesting because I feel like the answer changes a little bit every time.
Okay.
So I am a doctor turned entrepreneur. I and of course the author of my book Unlicensed Medicine, which came out last November in 2025. I am Indian American and I grew up mostly in India, came here for my psychiatry residency training and I went to med school in India. I came here for my psychiatry residency in the East Coast. And then I realized that it really wasn't what I had in my mind. And I just did not feel very aligned with Western medicine and some of the ways of practicing it. And that's when I kind of walked away from it and discovered other alternate forms of healing. So I am, a certified Jungian coach, and I am also a family constellation therapist. So that's what I speak about in my book, and also, of course, tying it into personal example of my own healing journey with ancestral um, trauma. And I am an advocate for raising awareness on the missing piece of ancestral healing and the importance of it in today's world, be it Eastern or Western medicine, and just how much of our, trauma is not really ours.
You said trauma's not really ours. When you say trauma's not really ours, can you go a little into that and like what do you mean when you say trauma's not really ours?
Um, so I would say, personally, I think that 90% of trauma is inherited, and that is just the kind of epigenetic part of it. And also, scientifically. And the second part is that what family constellations or therapy talks about is that we all are part of this ancestral field, um, the collective field um, of morphic resonance or the quantum field, what as we call it. And then every family has its own ancestral web free field. And we unconsciously inherit this and repeat patterns or cycles as a form of unconscious loyalty to our ancestors. So that is what I mean by most of the trauma that we have is not ours. Of course, growing up and in your own span of life, you've had experiences which have added to personal trauma. However, a majority and a chunk of it is still a loyalty and mirroring of a pattern which is present in your lineage. That's what I mean.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. You mentioned alternative forms in your conversation earlier. Can you go kind of go into that? Is that like alternative forms of healing?
I wish we didn't call this alternative, and I wish this was more mainstream. And I guess my intention with my book is also to kind of raise awareness about, because when I discovered systemic and family constellations healing therapies after leaving my psychiatry residency and um, leaving the Western medicine system. And I discovered this. I was like, why are not more people doing this? And why don't more people know about this? So, but the interesting part is whoever I do speak to globally in different parts of the world, I do see family constellations really coming up. Um, so that is kind of the majority of the healing. um I Yeah, I wish it wasn't under the umbrella of alternative currently, but that's what I mean. And I also, I'm a Jungian coach, and Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist. He was a spiritual psychiatrist, one of the really few ones who, back in his time, more than a century ago, of course, he was kind of the odd sheep in a way of, why are you trying to bring in spirituality into something which is so technical and medical? So that's where kind of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung parted ways. So I also do bring in some of that and Jungian
Yeah.
aspects to healing and talk about that in my book. And specifically with regards to Carl, to shadow work. And I talk about ancestral shadow work and how we carry ancestral shadows. So yeah, so I think I combine those two and I talk about it. And thirdly, I also talk about somatic work and the importance of how a lot of people say that our bodies actually are unconscious mind and the part which remembers. Um, so and the importance of actually healing your body and how disease manifests, or trauma, or unprocessed trauma manifests in the body as illness. So those are through somatic work. And I think also the somatic work is gaining popularity through some famous practitioners with regards to the polyvagal theory, nervous system healing. So yeah, I would say those three things.
Alright, and so you mentioned, about the ancestral web, and so when we think about the ancestral web, like, how far back would you say that go? Is that, like, grandparents, great-great-grandparents, or is there, like do we know?
So I would say that I don't think I have a definitive answer about this, like a concrete, like 100% proven one. But the common one that I hear and that I have learned is that it goes up to 7 generations back. That's something which I've commonly heard, and I have been taught that. And as far as healing is concerned, as far as the practicality of like unburdening yourself from those patterns and webs, my mentor, always taught me that a lot of healing can be done by bringing it right home to just mom and dad, to to father and mother. So a lot of um, loyalties or enmeshments in this web can be done by just unburdening from mom and dad. But if you ask me how far back it goes, I would say 7 generations is what I have heard.
Okay. Alright, that's very interesting, because I talk a lot about, like, family dysfunction and passing down generational traumas and um, so can you tell us a little about specifically the family trauma being passed down, like what just a synopsis of it from your book.
Yes.
Not too much because we want the people to actually read the book. So can you just give us just
Yeah.
a little bit of that.
So I think the very a very simple and concrete example is to explain epigenetics, constellations, trauma. And what I really mean is, so when your grandmother was pregnant with your mother, right? And she was in your grandma's belly, and your mom's reproductive organs were there, and your mom had ovaries inside. So you were a cell in that ovary, which was obviously later fertilized, and that's how you came about. Whatever so epigenetics and this trauma pattern goes to say that whatever trauma your grandmother experienced firsthand when she was pregnant with your mother, you actually experienced that as well. So that won't even be counted as inherited trauma. That that would we count that as first-hand trauma because you were a cell also exposed inside your mom's organ ovary. So that is kind of the idea behind the first-hand stress and trauma of how the ancestral trauma works. And then comes the other parts of the unconscious loyalties and patterns and certain behaviors already present in a family system. But just speaking, whatever stressors, whatever your grandmother went through, whatever trauma, whatever her nervous system couldn't handle at the time, that was essentially passed on to you directly.
Oh my, that makes so much sense. And I'm a very visual person, so I'm just like imagining my grandmother pregnant with my mom, and then like I'm just like a little cell within this little cell. Hmm, that's that makes you think. I'm very interested to hear more about this the your book. So you mentioned earlier, you said that you're an advocate for missing ancestral healing. What exactly does that mean?
Means is that, I have been fortunate to learn on both sides of healing. Um, the alternative from family constellations, Reiki, kind of the Eastern spiritual healing, and also Western medicine. I went to medical school. I'm a doctor. I did 2 years of psychiatry residency. And, one of my therapists always used to say that life is not or, it's and. So I really do think that there is a time and place for both of them. And what I mean by ancestral healing missing is I don't see that as much emphasized in Western, and I don't see that as much emphasized in the spiritual. Am I saying that they don't mention it at all? No. I mean, you know, I have seen spiritual circles kind of talk about, oh, honor our ancestors and brush the kind of surface with it. And then, on the scientific side, you have let's say somebody is prone to cancer, it's like, oh, it's genetic, it's family, this thing. But as far as the kind of psychological perspective and the healing and the trauma or the mental or the mind or the even the body, really, is it really separate? I don't see it being as emphasized in both the spaces as much as I think it is important, because what I think is a lot of the healing in today's time is very much like, oh, when you were little, your childhood, XYZ happened, your dad did this or your mom did that. So that's why today you behave kind of like this and that. It's very narrow, the lens of it. Um, and my intention is kind of really broaden the lens, and that this is way back. This is so much more than just you and your childhood. This goes way back. There is this pattern of loyalty and repetition in a family system. Um, it's so much more than just the superficiality of like, oh yeah, this is genetic, you like inherited it. um there is so much healing which can happen when you get to the root cause of it. And when we talk about root cause, most of the time, if not all of the time, it is an ancestral trauma which has not been healed and has just been going on and on and on. And I think that's what I think people really miss. Or even if they don't miss, I don't think they realize the depth of it, or the importance of it. For me, it's like, you have medication, you have talk therapy, you have like other forms of healing. I find them very spiritual, very superficial, very band-aid like, not very long lasting. But I really think that when you really focus on the root cause or the ancestral this thing, and you really see like how deep it goes, that's what I want to really emphasize on. It doesn't end with, let me just give a concrete example. It's like, you have your mom, and your mom, or maybe your grandma is still alive, and let's say your great grandfather was in war, right? And it doesn't end with him just passing away, or just burying him, or whatever form of cremation is appropriate. The story doesn't end there of the trauma, just because the ancestor is not there any longer. The the field demands equilibrium, equality. If some ancestor was ostracized, somebody was unfairly killed, an untimely death, somebody died before, a parent died, like all of these different kinds of like traumas, that goes on and gets passed down. It's not so simple as that doesn't affect me. That was my great grandfather in the World War. So I think that's what I really want to emphasize, that we are still carrying and repeating patterns which we don't have any idea to, and we are still limiting it to very much of, oh, your childhood was like this, so you are behaving like XYZ. So that I think that's what I want to really emphasize and widen the lens.
So are you saying that your childhood doesn't have a direct reflection on the behavior? It's more so your genetic makeup, or
Of course, your childhood has an impact on how you are today, 100%. What I'm saying is that if you actually start closely looking at your mom, and your grandma, and maybe if if you are aware of the further down, you will see that there is a repeating pattern which you experienced, your mom experienced, or your grandmother experienced. So it's not just you and your childhood, it may be your mom and her childhood too. That's what I'm saying. Yes, your childhood affects you, but what I'm saying is, if you go in deeper, you will see a pattern which is repeating way back. That's what I'm trying to say. So it didn't really start with you, is what I'm saying.
okay. Okay, I got you. That makes sense. So when you come in contact with, well, actually, I want to go here. I want to kind of rewind and go back to your reason from going from, I guess, want to say modern Western medicine to being an entrepreneur, and more so focusing on more of a spiritual aspect and of medicine. Like, what made you switch lanes?
Oh, I would say several reasons. There was not like one reason. I I think I started to see in my second year about, I'd say I was 7, 8 months before I started really, um before I made the call to leave. I really started feeling like this is very different from what I had in my mind, as what working in healthcare would be like. So that was the practical discrepancy. B, I saw a lot of injustices, which it's hard to turn a blind eye to. I did not find a sense of purpose and fulfillment. For me personally, depth is a really big driving force. And I do not feel like I was coming very close to really healing or curing people. So that part was really missing. Thirdly, I thought that, see, I'm not against psychiatry or Western medicine at all. Not at all. I think that there is a time and a place for it, and it's absolutely life saving. However, I do think that there is, with a lot of guidelines and rigidity, it becomes to the fact that you have to be by the book or diagnose people by the book or kind of fit them in a box or kind of give them a certain kind of medication. That was no, it was getting to a point where I was really questioning that. And thirdly, I think what was really personally I did not like was the child and adolescent part of it. When I would work in the psych ER, like there was like a 6-year-old and he has like barely started his life, and he's like diagnosed with ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder and intermittent explosive disorder. And then there's like a 14-year-old with like almost like bipolar. And then, we are talking about another 12-year-old who has like possible schizophrenia. I don't believe that. I just, I don't know what to say, but I just think, for me, if you ask me, Meher, like what are psychiatric disorders? I personally think that all psychiatric illnesses are a manifestation of unprocessed trauma, and of them manifesting in different strengths and forms, from whether it be a little bit of anxiety to it being full blown psychosis. It's basically unprocessed passed down trauma. So yeah, like I think my values were not aligning. And then, I do say, I say this: when you don't say no, your body will say it for you. And by the end of it, started to get really sick. I developed a gastric ulcer. I was like throwing up. I had like excruciating abdominal pain. I had to get an endoscopy. So I think um, when it really started affecting my physical body, that's when I was like, nothing in your life is worth your physical health. And as a doctor, you have to like practice what you preach. And if something is like bothering you to the extent of causing illness, because I was like, okay, today it's like an ulcer, tomorrow 10 years later it's going to be cancer, if I keep living out of alignment. So those were some of the reasons why I decided to leave. And yeah, it was not an easy choice. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I just wanted to kind of go into like the procedures and protocols and guidelines when it comes to like working in a hospital setting. There's certain things that you have to abide by. Would you say that the procedures and protocol guidelines they tie directly in with the injustices that you spoke of?
um I think that's really broad. It's very, very broad. And I think that there are nuances in this. What I will say is that I always used to say that the patient is the least of the problem. Like the patients were the least of the problem. And secondly, I was actually working in a very supportive program. So they actually did care about your mental health. My program director was very, very nice. My colleagues were very, very like empathetic. So I never saw this as an individual level problem that, oh, like doctors are not empathetic or they don't want to do their part. I never thought that it was that issue. I just thought that it was the system and the structure. And I did have some seniors who were very, they were into like public psychiatry or like, mental health laws and trying to really, work in the system to make kind of policy level changes. However, I personally, I don't know, personality wise, and like slightly more introverted. It was just, I didn't think that I could really make a difference from the inside as one person in the system to change it. Um, so yeah, it was. I think it was definitely a systemic level issue because you have insurance, then you have like billing, then you have like pharma, then you have you know of course somebody is depressed if they're suicidal or they're so worried and their mental health is not good if their basic needs are not met. They don't have like food, shelter, social support. So when those kind of larger issues are not taken care of, it's why are we slapping on more diagnoses when they come back to the hospital? So I think that, again, it's a really larger issue, which is not a doctor level failure. If
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. So I was just more so talking about like the procedures because I've been in the medical field and I know there's like certain guidelines and oh, you can't say this and you have to be this and we have HIPAA and there's certain things if you have this and you have this, it's a violation. So that was more so of my angle, but I do want to go kind of more into your book. Um so there's something in your book, speaking of your great grandmother's murder trial. Can you kind of speak to that and like what angle you took in your book with that?
so, I think retrospectively, I think that she was married off very young, in that age and time. And I think that she had postpartum psychosis because my grandmother was only around the age of 6 months. And of course, I want to be respectful. I wasn't there, and I don't want to talk on anybody's behalf of what happened, and that would be also just wrong order to do it from like ancestral, like they come before me. Um, but I think, yeah, she had undiagnosed postpartum psychosis, and that was an issue of 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 what happened. Um, and I obviously did not. I was kind of also of the same view of like, okay, that was then. She's not alive anymore, and story over, right? It doesn't affect us anymore. But when I started learning about constellations and epigenetics, I really saw the correlation between mental health issues being passed down and, yes, cycles and patterns still being repeated as a result of what happened. And that was initially quite shocking. um, and yeah, I think when you take out the logical aspect of it, and you really see the more trauma side of it, it's really it was quite significant.
And thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Um, so what are some other things that you want to let the audience know, like specifically about your book?
I think I really want to emphasize that our ancestors, I truly believe, that did the best that they could. And as somebody who has the privilege of evolution and more choices, more consciousness, more access to therapies, like, if you have postpartum psychosis today, we don't just let it go. You're taken to the hospital, given proper care and tools and stuff like that. Um, I would say that, honoring and respecting your ancestors for for their sacrifices is really, really important to move forward. Yes, you kind of unburden yourself, or you remove or you stop the patterns which are not serving you anymore, or are self-sabotaging, or are not pro-evolution. But I think there is a way to do it respectfully and honoring them. And, in this book is in no way to be seen as, oh my God, I'm so much better than the other women in my lineage because I'm woke and I'm like the cycle breaker. I kind of see it as a result of their sacrifices that I get to have this platform and honor to share this. So I think that part is really, really important, um, to acknowledge and do it in a respectful manner, because, even, yes, we get like trauma and inherited stuff, which is obviously not fun for anybody, but we also get ancestral gifts, right? Like if you're born into a lineage of musicians, or like singers, or like artists, or creatives, those are absolutely gifts you want to take forward and not like leave behind. So, you this is the point of consciousness and evolution, that you basically shed the baggage of like, this is not working, and I return this respectfully back to you. And now actually I would like to carry XYZ from you and honor you for that. So I think that this entire process should be done in a very respectful way. And, I think mentioning a topic as sensitive as the murder trial in my lineage is in no form of like disrespecting my great grandmother, more so of, using it as a first-hand, personable, vulnerable example of how deep down or how back it goes, and how the progeny which comes ahead has to kind of take on a result of what happened. And I'm like really trying to explain it from a scientific perspective. And um, as a family constellations therapist, one of the reasons why I really like constellations therapy is we don't side with victim or perpetrator. In the field or in the therapy, both victim and perpetrator are equal. So this is not about the legality part of it. So I think that's what I want to really come across as.
Okay. So outside of honoring your gifts that may have been passed down, what are some other ways that you can honor and respect your ancestors?
I think some of the ways which my mentor has taught me is definitely, on a death anniversary, buying them flowers. I have seen every constellator has a unique way of doing constellations and honoring this. Some of the ways that I've known, if you've buying them flowers, remembering them, lighting a candle in their honor. Also, I have heard some constellators saying that even like planting an olive tree in your like lineage's name, or your ancestor's name. I also feel like one of the ways to I think this part is important because this goes on beyond just the honoring part. When an ancestor is ostracized, right, and taken out of this thing, let's say they committed a crime, or back in the time they were not accepted for being different. The ancestor who was like cut out from the lineage, the field always demands a balance, because everybody has an equal right to belong. Like that is one of the laws of constellation. So I think especially the ancestor who was forgotten, really honoring that ancestor is very important. Like for starters, please find out their name, because I see so many people in not even knowing their ancestor's name. And trust me, I'm also guilty of this, because I was kind of telling my mentor this, and I was telling her, I had this family member, and they were involved in multiple car accidents, and that was a pattern that like happened with me also. And she was like, Meher, like, what was their name? And I was just like, she was like, Meher, you know. So I think really that is very respectful. Just find out this thing. Another thing I see is, when somebody's been ostracized for being different, and like, they don't belong to us or the family anymore, that is, it becomes a real void or an entanglement for then the generation who comes ahead becomes entangled with the person who was shunned out. So, maybe honoring them by bringing back a picture of them or of your ancestors back home, because sometimes when something negative has really happened, they're like, we won't even talk about them, we won't even like put up their picture in the house. So I would say, more than just your other ancestors which you already honor, really go and try to somebody who is really shunned away. That would be a really good way of restoring peace.
Okay. Okay, that's real good. So you've mentioned family constellation, and I see in your book you talk about family constellation therapy. Can you kind of speak to what that means for somebody who does not know?
I find this a hard question to answer because constellations can't be, how do I say, it can't be like logically explained. It's a very experiential therapy. Um, it is, b- it basically works on the principle, like I said, we all are connected through a morphic field, which is based on, I think, morphic resonance is based on physics. Um, and when you go to a workshop or a family constellations healing session, you either have objects or other people representing members of your family, and you vice versa representing their family members. And you are somehow able to channel the consciousness of the person or the ancestor or the role that you're playing. And when you go into the field as the facilitator, you're able to see imbalances or entanglements or enmeshments or unconscious loyalties going on, and able to kind of remove that and restore that. So, family constellations is essentially going a therapy which is ancestral in healing, and helps you with a pattern where you're really stuck or burdened in life, whether no matter what you try, it doesn't help out. Um, and really to go in and nip it in the root and find the root cause, because, um, yeah, that um, that you may be carrying an unconscious loyalty that you're not aware of. So that is this thing. I can even give an example. For example, let's say somebody is out of nowhere, facing legal issues, um, and they it was very odd. All of a sudden, they keep facing issues with legality. In constellations, father represents the law and government and that kind of system. And let's say you go into the field, you have a male client, and what you see is that the grandfather was ostracized or taken out, or he was imprisoned, and then he never got a chance to come back or respected or belong to the family. So now what happens is that the field demands a balance or a equilibrium. So now you are following your grandfather's steps unconsciously out of loyalty, and that pattern is being repeated. So, on a soul level, what happens is, who am I to live a full life when you couldn't? So I will, this way, at least I belong. If I self sabotage, at least I belong to my family system. I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
So that is just a example which came to the top of my head, but it's basically talking about how, you know, how we don't even realize what loyalties we are carrying, and a child would do anything to stay belonging to a family, even if that means sabotage, even if that means alcoholism, you know, suicide, anything like what you say, like negative or sabotaging. Because if some of your ancestors did that, because to the outside it may look like, like, why you, like, this makes no sense, like, why are you doing this, or why are you like hurting yourself or harming yourself, like you have no reason to. But what may be really unconsciously going on there is that you may be sabotaging because at an unconscious level it's unconditional love and pure loyalty, and actually a very big act of sacrifice. Because if because it's like, who am I to live a life when you couldn't? At least if I do XYZ like you did XYZ, I belong.
Mm.
Does
Oh,
that
wow.
make sense?
Yeah,
So,
that makes sense. That
so,
makes sense.
so, so there's a lot of like that kind of energy of following the dead.
Okay. Now, I know earlier you had mentioned a situation where you said that you mentioned a victim and a perpetrator, and you said that they're treated as equals. So, is that in family constellation therapy as well?
They are treated equal in the sense that everybody has a right to belong. So it doesn't mean that the perpetrator is has a morally less this thing to belong than the victim. The perpetrator is absolutely responsible for the consequences of their actions. This does not mean excusing accountability. This means giving back the guilt which actually belonged to the perpetrator. Because when you see a lot of victims, right? Instead of their perpetrators carrying the shame or the guilt which belongs to the perpetrator, the victim ends up holding it. So a lot of the healing in that kind of scenario, what I say is like the equality part is handing back the guilt and shame which appropriately belongs to the perpetrator. So what I mean is that this is how you restore order and balance. Because because if you don't, let's say that if you don't give the perpetrator a place in the field by acknowledging the crime or the injustice which happened, returning back the appropriate guilt, holding them accountable, what happens is a void or an entanglement or a karmic debt or whatever you want to call it is created. And that will keep happening and open space for another perpetrator to come in and keep filling that space for you. So that's so so that ways when you give the perpetrator the proper position,
Uh-huh.
hold them accountable, give them back the guilt, this thing. When I say equal right to belong, now they are a part of the field and they have been given a proper position, this thing. So now nobody else will come in future to be a perpetrator again and again repeat the cycle of victim perpetrator, because you gave the perpetrator their proper place and order. If that Does that make sense?
That makes sense. It's like a healing kind of process also, because of that place they kind of, it's, I feel like it makes them have some type of self-reflection.
Yeah, I don't know if I think self-reflection is very individualistic. And I think that I like, if you did something in the first place which you should have not done, maybe, like, I think it's so complex, the self reflection awareness, but it doesn't even require you to them to be self-aware or self-conscious, or you don't even need to get in contact with them, because these are representatives playing and channeling the consciousness of that person. So obviously, you're not going to have a sexual abuse victim and try to find the perpetrator to do this. Absolutely not. That's so re-traumatizing. But what I'm saying is that whoever is playing that, it can also be an object. You are just restoring this balance so that this person who is the victim in this scenario is not manifesting and repeating these victim perpetrator dynamics in their life again. That's what I mean by giving the original perpetrator their place.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Can you kind of walk us through your book? Like, any other information or anything that you may not have already shared that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I would say that constellations, a little bit of, like I always say this, a little bit of poison is medicine, and too much of it can kill you. So go slow in healing. The slower, the better, the more long lasting. I myself have been guilty of that. And I am reminded by my mentor so many times that, you know, you rebound back when you like really accelerate fast through the healing process. And constellations, again, I'm not trying to sell the next magic pill out here. It is extremely effective. It is extremely root cause. However, it's very important to find a practitioner who is trauma informed, who doesn't push you to resolve healing as soon as possible. Because let's say in one session, you are only ready, or your nervous system, let's say, more than that, is only ready to go from point A to B. That might just be acknowledging that something even happened, right? Do
Mhm.
not try to rush it from A to Z if the person is not ready, because constellations is extremely re-traumatizing. Because essentially, when you go back into the field or the healing session, you are reopening a traumatic loop. You're going back in time when the imbalance happened. So very important to trust your constellator, to find somebody trauma informed and not rush it. And really important to, I would say, follow it up with some kind of somatic work or integration. Like, don't be going and running a marathon the next day. Really, take time to integrate it, like Epsom salt baths, like walking, journaling, giving it time, not being like, oh my God, this is so effective. Let me get a session every single week. Give
Mhm.
it time to integrate and for those changes to manifest in the material. That's what I would really say, because I think when you introduce something new, it goes kind of like viral, and then people start seeing the negative effects of it. So really, like, do it in balance and take it slow. That's what I would say, be a bit cautious about.
Okay. Thank you for that. All right. If it was one thing that you about like the healing community, anything that has to do with your practices that is misunderstood or people may have it wrong, what would you say that thing is?
I would say even healers need healers. I don't know why, when you were asking me that question, that was the first thing which came to my mind. I think sometimes, on Instagram and whatever a social media platform, when you see a certain person's transformation or the healing journey, you may think that, wow, magic, like they don't need to heal anymore, or they already spent all of this time healing. I think healing is a never ending process. Like, you do it till the day that you die. Um, and don't like idealize somebody else's journey. Don't compare it. I say this to myself also, because I'm so guilty of this. Don't compete in the trauma Olympics of like, you know, but I had that too. And that, you know, oh, but who am I to complain and like then gaslight yourself? I talk about this in the book too, like gaslight yourself, like, oh, I just had that happen to me, and I'm just being ungrateful, but that other person had like five worse things happen to me. Like, everybody's story is valid, and kind of comparing the trauma Olympics doesn't benefit anybody, especially a trauma victim who's already dealing with low self-esteem and self-criticism. So yeah, that's what I would say, that like, be more realistic.
Okay. That I like that. That's good. So, if one wanted to reach out to you or find you, do you have any social medias or any ways of contact that you could share with the audience?
Yes, I am on Instagram and TikTok as Dr. Meher Chahal, and just Dr. Meher Chahal. And I have an email. You can reach out to me, contact me. I would love to hear from you. It's info@drmeherchahal.com. And yeah, and my book, and also the audible version of it will also be out soon in March. So it's also available in like Barnes and Nobles, Kindle, different platforms.
Okay. And I saw that it's on Amazon as well.
Yes.
All right. Awesome. I am going to put all Dr. Mahesh's information in the description box below, so that you can just click on it and get to her book, her email, excuse me, as well as her social medias and her website. I want to thank you so much for being here, Dr. Chahala. We appreciate you. You got some really good information, some great insight. I look forward to reading your book.
Thank
Um,
you.
and it's out right now, guys. Barnes and Noble, as she said, it is also on Amazon. So go ahead and click on the links below and get to it. Did you have anything that you'd like to say, Dr. Chahela, before we close out?
Um, I would say it's not to toot my own horn. Um, and trust me, this coming from somebody who's as perfectionistic and self-critical as me, I would say like it is really hands down one of the best self-help, self-healing books out there, because it's very deep and very authentic, and it's not one of those books that you read and you're like, oh my God, this is like so generic. Like, go meditate and just be grateful and happy. It's none of that shit. It's really raw and really authentic. So give it a try. You won't be disappointed.
Awesome. Yeah, I heard it from her. You heard it straight from the horse's mouth. So make sure you check it out. And again, thank you so much for being with us today. And we are out. Peace.